Greetings, people of the interwebs, Jake here. So, we are finally done with Season 2 of Rings of Power. And much like I promised in the Season 2 finale review that I did, this video, as I'm sure you can tell by the title, I'm going to be talking about why this show should be cancelled. Now, before I go into that, let me first clarify a few things. So, one, even though I really don't like this show, I'm not saying it should be canceled just purely because I don't like it as a Tolkien fan. Also, I'm not trying to disparage the people who do like this show. Granted, I don't know why people would like this show, but clearly there are people who do, and good on you. I'm happy that people enjoy this show, and I'm really hoping that, like, the silver lining in this god-awful series is that it will inspire people who haven't read the books to actually read them. And then once they read the books, they'll be like, oh, man, this show's just awful. Or, I don't know, maybe they'll still enjoy the show for what it is, totally fine. But all of that out of the way. So, here are some of the reasons why I think this show should be canceled. One, I'll go over, like, just kind of some of the basics that I think most people can kind of agree with is bad dialogue, bad script, lack of character development. Like, in 2 seasons and 16 episodes, I can't really tell you anything about these characters outside of, like, the stuff that are established pretty early on. Like, Galadriel hates Sauron and is hunting him. Other than that, I can't really tell you much about this version of Galadriel and her, because she really hasn't had, like, any growth or arcs or anything like that, or much development. Same with any other character in this series. And it's hard to get behind characters when they're very stagnant. There's no real development. There's no arcs that they're, going through or anything like that. And it's just a poorly conceived series that I think was kind of doomed to fail from the beginning, because even though I like the idea of telling a story set in the Second Age and kind of starting with, like, the beginning of the Second Age and building up to the Battle of the Last, or the War of the Last Alliance, without the rights to the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales, which kind of gives a lot of extra detail on the Second Age, because they're essentially just working off what they have in the appendices. And Amazon have the exact same rights that Warner Brothers do. They have The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and then the appendices. That's it. And there really isn't a whole lot in the appendices. It's just a highlight reel of the Second Age. So, like, the Rise and Fall of Numenor, the Forging of the One Ring, along with the other Rings of Power, the Battle of the Last Alliance, that kind of stuff. I'd say if, the appendices maybe encompasses about maybe 15 to 20, like, full pages of content that they can mine from. And if they had a good creative team, a good set of writers, experienced showrunners, they maybe could have done, because their plan is to do 5 seasons. I don't think 5 seasons would have been necessary, unless you wanted to do, like, say, kind of tell it from a non-traditional, like, story point, like, kind of more of an anthology, where, maybe, say, one season focuses on, like, the Rise of Numenor. Next season focuses on, like, the elves, and, that's where you introduce Anatar and his deception of Celebrimbor. Not to say that, I don't know, that may not be the best idea either, but I think that could have worked better. But all that to say is I do think that, like, they were kind of doomed from the start because they had such little to work with. And to me, it's like, why bother telling a story set in the Second Age if you don't have a lot of, like, access to a lot of the Second Age content? But that's a whole other thing. And so all those, like, criticisms that most people, fans and just casual audiences have kind of all agreed on is, so even with season 1, so it did fairly well with, like, because they dropped the first two episodes the same day. And obviously a lot of people were very interested in watching this show. They were, for various reasons, some people excited, some people, like myself, were very cautiously optimistic. I was hoping for the best because I'm a huge Tolkien fan, and I really wanted to love this show, and I wanted it to be amazing. And so some people watched it, just because, like, alright, fingers crossed, let's hope for the best. So a lot of people watching this show for various reasons, and then it just significantly dropped. So by the time the first season finished, I think several weeks afterwards, the basic viewership ratings came out. And here in the US, only about 37% of people who started the show bothered to finish it. It's a little bit better international. I think it was around like 43, 45% of people who started the show finished it. So if this was like a rom-com or sitcom or like any other genre of like a significantly smaller budget, those still wouldn't be great numbers, but they'd be well enough, like good enough to warrant like continuing at least for a second season and seeing where it goes from there. However, Rings of Power is the most expensive show ever made. It was $1 billion to get the rights and then for the production costs of season 1 alone. $1 billion. So, when you see those numbers, you would think I imagine Amazon were probably in panic mode because they had invested so much money. They were so convinced that they had a hit on their hands. And then they see those numbers. Now, they had already invested so much money to where they were already going to do at least a season 2 regardless. And yeah, fair enough, because yeah, you're already in so deep, you might as well do at least a season 2 and see where things go. Now, here's where I think season 2 is even worse than season 1, because honestly, they're about on par in terms of like the quality of writing and stuff like that. But where I give season 1 a little bit more leniency is so season 2 they had a whole 2 years to write the ship, because even though season 2 like the script I think had already been, I don't know if all of it had been written, but like they had already started the script and probably a little bit of like pre-production before season 1 had even finished. But even with that being said, that was still plenty of time for them to take the constructive criticism of season 1 and, improve, because that's where constructive criticism, that's the whole point of that. And yes, even though it can be kind of unpleasant at times to get constructive criticism on your work, I myself am a writer, and so yeah, I've gotten some criticism of like some of my stories, but I take that and I'm like, okay, so here's what didn't work for my little test audience, and here's the feedback they gave me. Here's where I will take their feedback and make improvements. That way, the next draft that I send them, they'll hopefully enjoy it more, and there'll be less feedback. And so that should have been what they did with season 1, is they took the notes of like, okay, what worked, which in my personal opinion, not a lot worked with season 1, but whatever. They still could have taken the criticism that people gave and been like, all right, here's what people did like, here's what they didn't like, so now let's adjust the script and improve. Let's beef up the dialogue, let's beef up the overall quality of writing, because that is my biggest problem with this show, egregious lore and unnecessary lore changes aside, is just terrible, terrible, terrible writing. Blows my mind, the amount of money that Amazon invested in this show and didn't bother to, write good scripts. But that's a whole other tangent. So, again, they had 2 whole years to really, hone their craft. And they didn't. They just decided to ignore all the constructive criticism and double down and just do their stupid fanfic, and look what happened. So season 2 did not, their viewership didn't increase, which really isn't a huge surprise, because when you lost that many people, 37% of people domestically, who started the show and then bailed on it. So they only 8 episodes. Not a huge commitment, even though each episode is about an hour long, but that's still, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge commitment when a lot of shows are, 10, 12 episodes, around 45 minutes to an hour long. That's a slightly bigger commitment, but again, 37% of people domestically, and then about 43, 45 people, so not even half the people, the audience that they were hoping to appeal to, didn't bother to even watch, or finish watching season 1. So, obviously, those people didn't show up for season 2, and I imagine the people who did, who were, again, hopefully okay, yeah, season 1 wasn't great, but maybe they improved. Maybe they learned the lessons. Then they started season 2, and were like, oh, no. They did not learn anything at all. In fact, they completely ignored any constructive criticism and just continued giving us nothing but garbage. So I think like season 2 had a 50% drop with audience ratings compared to season 1. So I'm not good at math. I can't do the math on the fly here, but that's still not good when you already had 37% of people domestically and around 45% of people internationally bail on the show before season 1 even finished. So then to have that percentage of people who did bother to finish, you dropped about 50%, and I think they did, like, viewership did increase a little bit after like those first like 3 or 4 episodes, but not drastically. Like, not enough people returned to the show. They also didn't get enough new people to view this show to where, in my opinion, it warrants continuing to a season 3. Now, that being said, Amazon, one of the stipulations for purchasing the rights is they're contractually they're contractually obligated to do 5 seasons. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm no expert on contracts or any of this stuff, so there might be a way that they can like work their way out of this contract, but assuming that there isn't some kind of stipulation or anything like that in the contract, and if they can't, they really only have 1 or 2 options. Either one, they basically cut their losses, they bite the bullet and be like, look guys, I know we said we were going to do 5 seasons, but we just can't. We've invested so much money, no one's watching this show, no one likes this show, we're going to buy ourselves out of this contract. Which I imagine would cost a lot of money. Or 2, their second option, that I see, again, there might be other options out there, but again, I'm no lawyer, I'm no expert, but these are just the 2 that come to mind, the 2 kind of obvious options that I see that Amazon have before them. So the second option is that they just power through and are like, okay, yeah, no one likes this show, no one's talking about this show in a positive light, but we're just going to keep going anyways because we're Amazon, we have all the money in the world, and we can just keep throwing money at this. And also, kind of why I can actually see them continuing with this show is Amazon, unlike other streamers, their streaming platform is kind of just like an added bonus to their business. Whereas, like, obviously Netflix, that is their entire business model, is streaming. Or even, say, Max, where obviously Warner Brothers, they produce movies and shows, theatrically and on their other networks that they control or own. Max is just like an added, it's still an important branch of that overall company and adds revenue to their company. Whereas Amazon, yeah, it's nice if they get like views with like their shows and their original movies on Amazon Prime, but it's not. Imagine it's not as big of a deal for them if they don't get the views because, again, Amazon make most of their money through like their delivery service. However, I would still think that with the lack of viewers, it would still be not exactly inspiring for Amazon, especially considering how much money they have invested in Rings of Power and that they were really... Because again, they basically bought this property to buy a fan base because, Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, that legacy has endured for decades upon decades and has influenced so many other properties from like Game of Thrones to Dungeons and Dragons, and basically anyone who's picked up a pencil and written anything fantasy related, I imagine has either been directly or indirectly inspired by Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. And so, to me, I would think even if they pursue with continuing the show, they either cut the budget, so that way it's a little bit less expensive, because I think like both season 1 and 2 were around like $200-300 million overall production value, which is insane for only 8 episodes. And outside of the visuals, that is the one thing I'll give this show, that and the score by Bear McCreary, have all been pretty solid, or most of the visuals. There were some where definitely they were a little over-reliant on like green screen, or I don't know, maybe like they didn't, like the scene wasn't as important, I don't know, but for the most part the visuals have all been pretty solid. In particular, like I've stated before, I really love the visuals for like Khazad-dûm and Numenor. But that's about it. Because again, the costuming I don't think is that great. Even though I like the cast, I think they are overall good actors. They haven't really been able to showcase that much just because they're given such terrible scripts to work with. And even the best actors, when they're given a terrible script, there's only so much they can do to polish it and make it, passable. And so I really do feel sorry for the cast because I think the cast they're doing the best that they can with what little they have to work with. And there have definitely been some of the cast members that have I think in my opinion still shined Lloyd Owen, who plays Elendil. I think he's done a really good job. Peter Mullen as King Durin, which he's a character actor who's been in so many stuff to where he's reliable regardless of how terrible the script is. He's gonna make the best of it. And there are a few other actors even though Arondir I think is actually one of the more Tolkienian characters that feels more Tolkienian. But also again the actor hasn't been really given a whole lot, and Arondir, as cool as a character as he is, can't really tell you much about the character other than he's cool elf dude. That's about it. So I feel like they either cut the budget and then this show just doesn't look as good, and that is one of the few kind of appealing factors with this show is, again, it does look good overall. But if they cut the budget, it doesn't look as good, and then it just feels like a cheap soap opera, which it does. It feels more like a soap opera than it does this high production value TV series. Or two, if they, in my opinion, what I think is the wiser decision is to again just bite the bullet, cut your losses, and cancel this show. Yeah, you're probably going to end up paying a whole lot of money out to the Tolkien estate, but I feel like that'd still be the cheaper option than continuing with these next 3 seasons, even if they do cut the budget. And basically just, admit defeat, tell the fans, the viewers, just be like, hey, so we tried, it failed, and we're done. We might try and do this again a few years later down the road, because even if, say, they do finally take all the criticism of seasons 1 and 2, because I think season 2 or season 3, there's a 2-year gap. They have 2 years before this 2026 is I think when it's supposed to come out. So if they do finally wake up and realize that no one likes this show, there's all this negativity towards it, and they do try to course correct, I feel like it's a little too late at that point, because they've had 2 seasons that had a very lackluster response, and even if season 2 or season 3 does manage to be decent or even good, they've already lost so many of the fans that there's not going to be a huge turnaround of people who do come back for season 3. And again, even if it is good, there's a lot more positivity towards it. How many people that they lost with those first 2 seasons will actually bother to return for season 3? Because imagine a lot of them they were just burnt. They were optimistic about season 1, they gave it a shot, they were even willing to give season 2 a shot, but then got pretty much more or less the same, and dipped out. Because that's another thing too, is this show is not... it's not adhering to the lore or canon at all, and to me that says one of 2 things. Either one, the showrunners and the writers didn't bother to read the books at all, they just looked up a Wikipedia article, took the names of characters and places and inserted it into their own fanfic, or 2, which I think is actually worse, they did read the books, they are familiar with the lore, they're familiar with the canon, and then they decided to just ignore it anyways, which to me is very malicious to where because again, they knew that if they changed a whole lot, that would upset fans, and yet they did it anyways, knowing full well that they would upset fans, and then gaslight the fans by basically being like, hey, this is all your fault. The reason why this isn't doing, gangbusters numbers viewership-wise is because of you fans and just being a bunch of assholes. And yes, there definitely were people like that, don't get me wrong. But the vast majority of people don't like this show for very valid reasons. Again, bad writing, bad storytelling, bad script, so many other problems with the production are just bad. And yeah, to me that is just very malicious to where they intentionally made all these decisions, because I guess they just hate Tolkien and were like, Tolkien, that hack, we can do a way better job than that old dude. And turns out they can't, because, surprise, surprise, when adaptions are made of source material and it's not like the source material, people don't like that. And that's why people have abandoned this show. and will continue to abandon this show. So, to me, there are no good reasons to keep this show going. The only thing I can think of is not just because of the contractual obligation, but because Amazon just has so much money to expend that they're like, whatever, we got so much money, we'll invest another $1 billion in this franchise that no one's watching or no one cares about. But to me, that's not a good logical reason to continue this show. That's just doing it out of spite, and that's your business. The whole point of a business is to make money, to add revenue to your business. That way you can invest in other things. So again, if Amazon, like if this show did well, Amazon would invest this into more, properties to adapt or more original content, which I would actually prefer more original content rather than like adaptations of comics and books and stuff like that, which is fine. But Hollywood is so like creatively bankrupt. I want new original ideas, but that's a whole other thing. So, in my very roundabout, rambly way, as my typical fashion, I just think there are more reasons that make sense to cancel this show than to keep it going. But that's my, again, very rambly opinions on why I think the show should be canceled. Give me your thoughts below. Do you think it should be canceled? Did you like the show? Do you think Amazon should continue to press forward? Or do you think there's a chance that season 3 and 4 and 5 can actually be good and they can redeem themselves after horrible, awful, atrocious abomination and bastardization of Tolkien's work with his first 2 seasons? So leave your thoughts below and do the usual YouTube-y stuff. Like, comment, subscribe, share, all that jazz. And until next time, everyone, cheers.